welcome to Choices, the Roe versus Wade controversy. I am Julie Coombs, the Outreach Program Director for the University of Montana's Women's Center. The University of Montana's Women's Center is a student-run organization located in University Center 119. Now I would like to present my co-facilitator for the evening, Deborah Franson. Deborah Franson is a volunteer board member of Planned Parenthood. She's a commentator for KUFM and a mother and homemaker. She will now explain the format of the evening.
Good evening and welcome. I'd like to thank the Women's Center for inviting me to co-facilitate this forum. I believe I was invited because of an entirely false reputation for being no nonsense. However, my responsibility tonight is to maintain order, and I take this responsibility very seriously. This forum is about choice, but it's from a pro-choice point of view. It is not about right or wrong or the morality of abortion. This is not a debate. It is designed to be educational, not confrontational or inflammatory. In order to maintain this structure, we will be accepting questions that are written and then screened by the panel. Now, this is just maybe addressed to only a few of you in the audience, but if a question comes in that is antagonistic, argumentative, or digressive, I'm sorry, but we won't use it. And if you have a problem with this, I'm sorry. Perhaps you should go have your own forum and we won't disrupt yours. In fact, if any audience member becomes disruptive, we will call campus security and have them removed. If this sounds unnecessarily rigid, I apologize, but I have had experience with forums that have disintegrated into shouting matches, and they're not only unpleasant, they are completely unproductive. I believe that the majority of us are here to learn and participate in a positive way, and I will preserve these rights. Thank you. Now Julie will introduce our panelists for this evening.
I will introduce the panelists from left to right. The first is Judy Smith. She's from Missoula Pro-Choice. Brenda Desmond is a visiting professor at the University of Montana School of Law. She is supervising attorney at the school's Indian Law Clinic and teaches legislation. She has 2 young children. Vivian Brooke, she's a 2-term state legislator running for a 3rd term. She's been on 3 committees. The first one is the Judiciary, where she was the vice chair. The second, National Resources, and 3rd, Local Government. She came to the political arena through the League of Women's Voters and the Catholic Church politics. She's a member of Catholic for Free Choice, and she's a state activist. She's been married for 25 years and has 3 daughters, 1 son, and a granddaughter. The next is Melanie Reynolds. She is Executive Director of Planned Parenthood of Missoula, which is the oldest family planning program in Montana. Planned Parenthood provides preventative family planning services to over 4,000 clinics each year and offers educational workshops to 3,500 individuals as well. Melanie's background is in child development and public health. She has been involved in family planning issues, in education, and reproductive rights for the last 10 years. Willa Craig, who is Executive Director for the Blue Mountain Clinic. Blue Mountain Clinic is a private nonprofit medical clinic that provides primary care for men, women, and children. In addition to first trimester abortions, the clinic also offers prenatal care and delivery and adoption, counseling, and referral. The next is Lindsay Richards. She's an obstetrician and gynecologist. She's a member of Medical Committee of Planned Parenthood of Missoula. And finally, we have Charlotte Morrison and Jennifer Gibson as University of Montana students from the Women's Center. We'll start out with Judy Smith.
Well, there's a number of us up here, and I'll want to take just a few moments. I think I was asked in some ways because I have a rather unique history with Roe versus Wade. I was one of the group of women who actually brought the action together to have this court case decided, go to the Supreme Court and become the law of the land. And so what I want to do is set a framework for you all, particularly now that we're here on a campus, to encourage you to think about the fact that these kinds of things that happen, whether they are called changes in laws or changes in value systems or changes in lifestyles, tend to happen out of our own lives and tend to be things that we organize ourselves around to do. And so in the late 60s, when a number of us were on campuses, I happened to be at the University of Texas campus, you happened to be here at the University of Montana campus. But from our own lives, we gathered together some experiences that made us very committed to doing something about reproductive freedom. There were two things that happened there. One was a real change in technology, and some other folks here may talk a bit more about that. But the change in technology that I was particularly aware of in being a student in the late 60s was, first of all, birth control became available, accessible, and something that most of us really could use in order to avoid unwanted pregnancies. And that was the first time that was true. If you talk to folks that are a little bit older than I am, the whole idea of being able to avoid unwanted pregnancy was still something that was very difficult to conceive until the birth control pill. So I would argue in the middle to late 60s, one of the major revolutions that brought about this whole discussion of the possibility of having reproductive freedom was a technological advance, which was that particular one of the birth control pill. The second one, which again some people here may talk a little more about than I will, although I will come back to it, is there was a rather revolutionary approach to abortion. For a long time it was considered a real surgical procedure, and by the time we hit the late 60s and early 70s, there had been a major change in how we thought about how abortions could be done. Abortions could be done with a cannula and could be done with a suction apparatus, so that basically abortions could be done in third world countries, which is where this particular technology advance first originated, but started to come really home. So that now, actually people that I know at that time, before Roe versus Wade, and again now, are saying that women, if forced to do this, not something I'm advocating, but if forced to do this, women could provide their own abortions in their own safe environments if that was something they absolutely needed to do because of the technology. So with that in mind, that technology came together with something else that was happening in the late 60s, something that I think was particularly powerful on campuses, which was the women's health movement and the whole move to women saying, we will take control of our lives. And so with the women's health movement came this understanding that there is a technology we will use, there is a technology we have a right to, there's a technology that we will gain access to. So a group of us at the University of Texas, some of us happen to be graduate students in the science departments, some of us happen to be doing whatever we were doing at that time on campus, came together and said, we think that this should be available to women, and so we'll make it available. So we started the birth control and abortion referral service in Austin. And what we basically did is we provided information for women on how to gain birth control that would work for them and also how to get abortions that would work for them. We drove women to Mexico at that time. It was illegal in Texas. So we drove women down south of the border to get abortions. We also arranged airplane loads of women to go to California and New York. We also talked to women who were suffering illegal abortions by going to places around Texas and working with the underground abortion providers, people who did things like sterile packing, who gave women ergot, who waited for women to go through convulsions in order to produce an abortion. I was thinking tonight before I came, I don't know how dramatic to be about these things because in some ways these are very dramatic stories, but I can remember very much talking to a woman who I knew who was in a sorority at the University of Texas while I was there. And she was basically determined to have an abortion, and I said to her, well, we can help you arrange one, but it's going to take several weeks. She said, no, I want to have one right now, and someone's given me the name and address of a woman in San Francisco that will give me one. And I do know that what happened to that woman through the grapevine of talking to people is she went and was given ergot, and some of you may know what ergot is. It's a form of a drug that causes convulsions. The woman took it, and the woman went through a rather incredible experience at a fraternity party where she had to leave the party, go outside, go through this kind of experience. Later on was admitted into the University Health Service and basically lost the ability to ever have children as a result of that illegal abortion. So again, dramatic stories, but stories that tell you the kind of experience that many of us were absolutely determined to do something about. So while we were able to provide access to illegal procedures, but safe procedures, because those of us went down and checked out those clinics in Mexico, and we went and checked out those clinics in California and New York, we were also determined to do something about the law. At first we decided to work through the Texas legislature to see if we could change the law at that level, and again, it's sort of a joke. I don't know if you get the joke about the Texas legislature, but if you listen to NPR, you can occasionally hear the joke about the Texas legislature. But anyway, the Texas legislature is probably pretty much as much of a joke as the Montana legislature, although, Vivian, of course, this is not a joke. Wonderful. But basically, we did some work there and tried to convince those men, because they were men, that we should have safe legal abortion, and that became very obvious to us very quickly. That was a very long-term process. And so literally, and this is what's important, I think, literally a group of us women, students at the university, were sitting together, drinking coffee in the equivalent of the Copper Commons and said, hey, let's get a court case, let's go to the Supreme Court, let's do something about this. And so that's what happened. Now, we weren't unique, and I'm not taking credit for Roe versus Wade in any sense. There were women all around the country doing the same kind of thing. But what I am pointing out to you is it's that kind of determination and commitment to say, we're going to do something here, let's decide what it is. So what we did is we said, we had a friend in the law school. Her name was Sarah Whittington. We said, Sarah, what would it take for us to bring a case that would go through the system and perhaps get to the Supreme Court? She said, well, we just have to find a defendant. We have to find someone who has been denied, not a defendant, someone who's been denied an abortion, someone who wants to bring this case. We'll challenge the constitutionality of the Texas law. We'll see how far up we can go. And so basically, through bake sales, through those kinds of organizing activities, we got the money together to bring a case. We managed to take it through to the district court, the various levels, and finally our case happened to be the one who made it through the Supreme Court that got decided on the basis of the right to privacy that indeed abortion should be legal in this country. As I say, I really take no credit for that. It was happening all over the country, but it was the product of the kind of determination that women had at that time to say, this is something that belongs to us. This is something we will have. And so if I have any message for you all at all tonight, it's to say that Roe versus Wade is the product of women's determination. And if Roe versus Wade goes through a process of change as a result of the Reagan administration, and in my opinion, men's determination to not allow that particular right to privacy to be maintained, it will be up to women's determination once again to do something about this. And so perhaps just to, again, wind us to the current point and then ask the other panelists to address this more directly, what I have seen happen over the last numbers of years since the Roe versus Wade decision was, in many ways, a result of a strategy on our part to go to the federal level, not fighting it out state by state. And now what's happened is by going to the federal level, we've had some changes in the federal political situation. We used to consider the Supreme Court a place that we went to see rights protected. Now most people would say that the last thing you want to do is to take a question of rights to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has become a very different kind of environment. If anything, where we've made progress is to say, actually, we may want to go to the legislature or to Congress instead of the Supreme Court. Now, I actually view that as progress. When we were discussing Roe versus Wade, we didn't want to touch the Congress or the legislature because we felt that that was more reactionary than the Supreme Court. Now, what we've done through a lot of the work and the fact that the pro-choice majority is here in this country is that we're probably able to get a better result out of Congress and the legislature than we can out of the judicial system. So in some ways, that's a very positive thing. But overall, as that judicial system has changed, we've seen the erosion then of this very basic concept of the right to privacy, including women's rights over their particular reproductive decisions. So as that's gone away in our political reality, the thing we're left with, I think, is to come back to this very basic state-by-state organizing. So, again, a take-home from this evening, from my point of view, for all of you that are concerned about these topics is there's some very important things that are going to happen during the next legislative session. It's also very important who's elected governor. Now, unfortunately, students tend not to vote. That's a real drag. When I was a student, we had a student movement that basically turned out something like 75 to 80% of the students on our campus. And if I could challenge any of you to anything, I would say take that as a goal in the next election. If you can turn out the student vote, you can make a very basic difference on the issue we're talking about tonight. Because in my estimation, that will be the issue that really determines the gubernatorial race in this state. It will be the issue that determines a great deal of the legislative races, and other folks here may want to talk more about that. But if students on this campus and other campuses can mobilize themselves around these issues, you can make a basic difference as to whether this state will actually respect the women's right to choose. Because what we have to do is we have to get rid of the Montana Abortion Control Act. And again, there's some strategy questions about that. If you're really interested, we can talk about it later. My basic premise is that abortion is a medical procedure. It should be regulated like any other medical procedure. We do not need a Montana Abortion Control Act. What we need is a discussion of how abortion is a medical procedure and will be regulated as any other medical procedure. To put that into place, we have to have an educated legislature. As we talked about earlier, an educated legislature is a goal. It's not something that we have achieved yet, but the kind of election results will take us a long way. Someone like Vivian can tell you a great deal more of what it's like to be a pro-choice legislator until this time. Hopefully what we need is a critical mass of pro-choice legislators and a governor that will not veto a pro-choice bill. Thank you.
Tonight I will talk about the Roe v. Wade decision. I'm going to concentrate on that decision for a couple of reasons. And I will review briefly the actions of the United States Supreme Court implementing and to a certain extent departing from that decision since it was made in 1973. I conclude that although Roe has been limited, the decision remains significant and wise. Under Roe, reproductive freedom for many women in this country remains a reality today, although the decision itself is under very strong attack by members of the United States Supreme Court, and I'm sure you know that. But putting aside the possibility of overturning Roe, the later interpretation of Roe that has already been made has resulted, I think, in a situation in which reproductive freedom is certainly not guaranteed to all women, and I speak specifically of young women and poor women, whose rights have been most severely limited by decisional law since Roe versus Wade. Further, it is obvious, as Justice Blackmun indicated in Webster versus Reproductive Health Services in 1989, state legislatures continue to try to enact legislation that arguably inhibits the rights protected in Roe, and some legislatures may go even further as the composition of the United States Supreme Court changes. For reasons that I think will become obvious, I certainly agree with Judy Smith that the best forum for continuation of any efforts in regard to the preservation of reproductive freedom at this point are the state legislatures, and certainly not the United States Supreme Court. To outline the Roe decision itself, in January 1973, the United States Supreme Court decided the case of Roe versus Wade. 7 justices of the United States Supreme Court, and that's significant because in later years, the justices have become much more fragmented in the abortion cases. But in 1973, 7 justices signed on to an opinion that held unconstitutional a Texas criminal abortion statute prohibiting all abortions except those performed to save the life of the mother. 3 justices wrote a separate concurring opinion because they wanted to make clear that they did not agree with everything that had been said by the other 4 justices, but they did agree with the decision. It was more a matter of how the decision was arrived at. The court ruled that the statute violated the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, which protects against state action the right of privacy, including a woman's qualified right to end a pregnancy. The court held that although a state cannot override that right, the state does have an interest in protecting both the pregnant woman's health as well as what the court called the potentiality of human life. Because the right to privacy is considered an important one, the court will only allow regulation that advances what is known at times as a compelling state interest, and at other times a significant state interest, and that does so, regulates in a narrow way. Thus, the court will examine restrictions under Roe v. Wade. The court will examine restrictions on abortion in light of the recognized state interest in maternal health and potential life, and decide whether the interference is justified and narrowly drawn. In practical terms, the court said this means that the state has no interest in regulating the abortion decision in the first trimester of pregnancy. In the period between the end of the first trimester and viability, which was then approximated by the court at between 24 and 27 weeks, the state may regulate the abortion decision in the interests of the health of the mother. Finally, in the stage of pregnancy following viability, the court may regulate abortion and even prohibit it, except where necessary for the preservation of the life or health of the mother. The court has departed from this trimester analysis in a small measure. However, the court still adheres to the divisions when they are analyzing whether or not certain restrictions on abortion are valid under the Constitution. Because much has been written and said about the Roe v. Wade decision, both negative and positive, I think it's important to look at the decision and hear a little of what the court actually said. in the words of Justice Blackmun, the author of the majority opinion. When I read the opinion now, it seems that it came from a time so long ago, in the sense that Justice Blackmun had tried so hard to generate a consensus on the issue and recognized so well, and better, I think, than the justices today recognize, or at least acknowledge, that there are no easy answers to this divisive issue. Still, he was able to garner the support of 6 other justices to sign on to the opinion. Early in the opinion, he made a series of remarkable statements, I think, and more sensitive and aware statements than I think we find elsewhere from the United States Supreme Court on this issue. He said, and I'm reading from the opinion, "We forthwith acknowledge our awareness of the sensitive and emotional nature of the abortion controversy, of the vigorous opposing views, even among physicians, and of the deep and seemingly absolute convictions that the subject inspires. One's philosophy, one's experiences, one's exposure to the raw edges of human existence, one's religious training, one's attitude toward life and family and their values, and the moral standards one establishes and seeks to observe are all likely to influence and to color one's thinking and conclusions about abortion." Thus, the court did not take the issue lightly. And if you've done any reading on the background of the opinion, you will know that Justice Blackmun approached the case with tremendous energy and caution, and has commented on the significance, the personal significance the decision has made to him. In describing the outlines of the constitutional right of privacy, the court said, "This right of privacy, whether it be founded in the 14th Amendment's concept of personal liberty and restrictions upon state action as we feel it is, or as the district court determined in the 9th Amendment's reservation of rights to the people, is broad enough to encompass a woman's decision whether or not to terminate her pregnancy." I'm not going to read the whole opinion to you, but I'm going to read 2 more parts. The court discussed, and again I think with great sensitivity, the possible harm presented by state regulation. The court stated, "The detriment that the state would impose upon the pregnant woman by denying this choice altogether is apparent. Specific and direct harm, medically diagnosable even in early pregnancy, may be involved. Maternity or additional offspring may force upon the woman a distressful life and future. Psychological harm may be imminent. Mental and physical health may be taxed by child care. There is also the distress for all concerned associated with the unwanted child, and there is the problem of bringing a child into a family already unable, psychologically and otherwise, to care for it. In other cases, as in this one, the additional difficulties and continuing stigma of unwed motherhood may be involved. All these are factors the woman and her responsible physician will consider in consultation." 2 justices, Justice White and now Chief Justice Rehnquist, dissented. They did not believe the majority's decision to be mandated by the Constitution. They also said, because this was such a sensitive issue over which, and I quote, "reasonable men may easily and heatedly differ," the issue, for the most part, should be left with the people and the political processes that people have devised to govern their affairs. I agree with them on that point. I'll read a final quote from the Roe case before I summarize the changes that have been made since 1973. This is from the dissent, and this characterizes the tone of the dissent, and I think you can contrast it with the tone, the very accommodating tone that Justice Blackmun presented in the majority opinion. "At the heart of the controversy in these cases are those recurring pregnancies that pose no danger whatsoever to the life or health of the mother, but are nevertheless unwanted for any one or more of a variety of reasons: convenience, family planning, economics, dislike of children, the embarrassment of illegitimacy, etc. The common claim before us is that for any one of these reasons, or for no reason at all, and without asserting or claiming any threat to life or health, any woman is entitled to an abortion at her request if she is able to find a medical advisor willing to undertake the procedure. Since 1973, the United States Supreme Court has permitted some limited regulation in the first trimester of abortion in the area of informed consent by the mother and in the area of what is called statistical record keeping. The court has made greater intrusions on the right of minors to have abortions. There have been a series of cases. We don't have time to go into them this evening, but the state of the law at present with regard to minors is that although they possess the same right of privacy that I as an adult have, the court has recognized a right of family intervention, which means that a law that requires parental consent to a minor's abortion is valid as long as there is what is called a judicial bypass, permitting this minor to go to court and argue that she is either capable of making her own decision or that a decision for an abortion is in her best interest. In the area of abortions for poor women, the court has supported in a series of decisions restrictions on funding for abortions, the restrictions on the use of public funding for abortions when necessary for maternal health. Finally, in the case of Rust versus Sullivan, last year the court has allowed restrictions on conversations by family planning agencies concerning abortion with anyone who is a client of the family planning agency. My time has ended minutes ago, so I'm going to conclude here, but I'm happy to answer questions later.
You all look like you're over 18, and I assume that you're all residents of Montana and have lived in Missoula County probably for more than 30 days. Are any of you out there not registered to vote? I was going to not talk if not everyone was not registered to vote, because it really doesn't mean a whole hill of beans or anything to me if you don't walk to the voting booth and vote and have your commitment registered. I think that in Montana we're really lucky to be able to have access to our legislators, have access to all of the candidates that we vote for, and I think it's really important. Voting day in the primary this year is during finals week. I hope you're aware of that. If you're going to vote absentee, get your absentee request into your county courthouse now. You can do that if you're not going to vote in Missoula County, if you're going to vote in your home county. I'm going to nag you, because that's all there is to it. If you don't vote, this issue is just, we're just all up here talking to ourselves, because we're the ones that are on the front line doing a lot of the stuff, and we need the people like you to get involved. So I came to this arena through the League of Women Voters, and I still carry that kind of activist sort of, everybody better register to vote if you want to be a part of the process. We have an upcoming primary, as I mentioned, June 2nd, and out in the foyer I put together a list of the legislative candidates that are up for re-election and are going to be on the ballot, and there's a map out there, and you can figure out who your legislators or your candidates and who the choices are. And what I'd like to tell you tonight is that I challenge all of you not only just to vote, but to call those candidates, find out who they are and what they stand for. You can ask them if they're pro-choice, or you can ask them how they stand on the issue. And if they say yes, they're pro-choice, or no, they're not, or they don't know, ask them another question. the fact that they say they're pro-choice isn't enough. There's a lot of variations on the theme. You can ask them, do they support parental notification? That's a bill that comes up all the time. That's an issue that'll always be raised. It sounds great. You know, the guys out there, they think, oh yeah, if my daughter's pregnant and she wants to have an abortion, I should know. Oh, I think if she's going to have an abortion, I'd go along with her, but I should know. Well, is that right or not? I mean, what do you think? Should he know? Should it be in the law? Well, I don't think so. I think that there's a lot of cases where that's not right. And like Brenda was talking about, it's okay if we have a judicial bypass. Well, I just like to have there to be nothing really in the law about who has to be notified, because it just creates a lot of dilemmas for a lot of individuals and a lot of people who are seeking abortion and have perhaps gotten pregnant by that parent that thinks that they should know. So I think there's a lot of variations on the theme, and so ask those legislators, ask those candidates, ask those guys. You know, they don't get it. So it's a good phrase, use it, and ask them about, well, do they think that abortion should be regulated for any reason? What do you think? If you're pro-choice, do you think just because a woman is pregnant by rape or incest, then abortion's legal? Or is it the right to privacy that they really believe in? We have in our Montana Constitution that was passed in 1972 a clause that provides for the right to privacy. As a legislator, when I'm sworn in, I swear that I will uphold the Montana Constitution. I take that quite literally. Ask them if they do. The right to privacy is right in there. It's written in our new Constitution. We're very blessed to have that. Ask them if they believe that those are choices that only a person who is faced with that difficult decision that they can make in the privacy of their own, wherever, in their own world. Ask them, because they don't get it. They just don't get it, because they can say they're pro-choice, and they can stand there and they can vote the wrong way every time. So get out there and get on the phone and confront them. Ask the gubernatorial candidates. Go all the way down the line with all the restrictions you can think of. Would they support this restriction? Would they support that restriction? Because it's there and it's going to happen. And if we don't get a legislature that's going to be real strong pro-choice, we can lose our right on the right, and we can lose, I mean, it's just going to slip away. And only those select few women who can afford it will be able to access the service. The other thing I'd like to tell you about and warn you about during the elections is I'm a Catholic, and I am involved with a group called Catholics for Free Choice. A lot of people call it an oxymoron, but there is hope. I don't know where, but I keep thinking there is. And one of the things that the Catholics for Free Choice is really aware of is the real strength of the church in influencing the congregation of how to vote. And what they do is they get up from the pulpit, the leaders and the bishops and the priests and the whoever, and tell you which candidates are the right ones to vote for. And if any of you go to church, or if any of you have friends that go to church, I'd like you to be aware of that during this election process, election cycle. It's going to be a real issue. Choice is the issue that the bishops, the Catholic bishops, have determined is number one issue. Abortion, the right to abortion. That's their number one issue. They're going to have people out there preaching against it. In the Missoula Right to Life latest newsletter, there was a list of churches that support the Missoula Right to Life. Now, I don't know if those churches give money to that group. I'd like to find out. But I would guarantee you that somewhere along the way, those churches in Missoula are going to be preaching, and they're going to be telling their parishioners and their congregations how to and who to vote for. Well, that's not right. That's like me. I'm a legislator that represents the university district. I would imagine that to be compared to the fact that if I have a friend who's a professor here, they would stand up in front of their class and tell everyone in their class to vote for me. That's not right. So I would like to just to have you all aware that those kind of influences happen around this issue. This is the issue, and I can't emphasize that enough. How much time? Is that it? I'm nagging. I haven't watched.
I haven't watched either.
Okay, I have two more quick things. I just want to say that in the 1991 legislature, we did try to pass a pro-choice bill. There'll probably be some efforts, as Judy mentioned, to work on pro-choice legislation. I'd encourage you all to get involved. And in light of the fact that we've had a lot of clinic violence here, both in Helena and Missoula, and we've had people tying up the courts and using a lot of time and money in our city courts, that we may consider strengthening some laws to enact higher fines or punishments for those kind of activities. That's one thing that the public is aware of. I toured the Planned Parenthood clinic in Helena, and it's just an absolute disgrace. People should be just screaming about the fact that that was just outrageous action. An arsonist took it upon himself or herself to destroy a place where people go to be comforted, to be supported, and to seek services that are legally theirs. And I think it's outrageous that we have that kind of activity in Montana. So if it's outraged others, there probably will be some legislation to be worked on in that regard. One of the things that I'd like to also try to work on is there is a crime victims fund in Montana, and I'd like to be able to start the process. It would only be a beginning, and it wouldn't, I don't think, get support, but I think that the crime victims fund should be used to fund or to provide abortions for victims of rape and incest. That's money that's available there for victims. So those are some ideas, and I think that we need all the help we can get, and I just encourage you to find out who represents you and if you want them representing you.
A lot of times people, as the director of Planned Parenthood, people come up to me, and it's not infrequent, they come up to me with a question, and especially now with all the issues with abortion rights that people have already talked about, they ask me a question: isn't there anything, Melanie, that the right to life groups, the anti-choice groups, and Planned Parenthood and the pro-choice can agree on? Isn't there any answer to this? And I've heard this in our board meeting, I've heard this with people all around the state. My answer is yes. There's something that we can agree on, and that is that we can all work for one thing, which is to prevent the need for abortion. And that's something that I believe that all of us have a strong interest in doing. And for me, I've been involved in this issue for a long time, there's only one way to prevent abortion, and that is to prevent unwanted pregnancy. If you prevent the need, you can prevent the need to have it happen. And so I really think that there's a way for that to happen. I don't think you can stop abortion by having a bullhorn outside of an abortion clinic and yelling at someone, or playing Christian music very loudly outside of a clinic, which happens here in Missoula. I don't think you can do it by burning down a clinic. The clinic in Helena is an example of that. They're still providing services. They're still meeting the needs of Western Montana, even though someone did try to stop that from happening. Picketing outside a Planned Parenthood or an abortion clinic is not going to stop people from making that choice. But there is a recipe, I believe. I believe in recipes, and I believe there is a couple things that can be done. One is that I think that contraception needs to be more readily available. And you may say that, oh, contraception is available in Montana. And it is, but out of all the 56 counties in Montana, there's family planning programs in only 25 counties. So less than half of the counties in Montana, women have to drive an incredible amount to get services. For Planned Parenthood of Missoula, we have women from Salmon, Idaho, West Glacier, Superior, Thompson Falls, Trout Creek, Knoxon. They're driving hours and hours to get basic family planning services. That's an incredible barrier, especially for a low-income woman or a teenager. In the United States, we have the dubious honor of having one of the highest teenage pregnancy rates in the world. In the industrial nations, we are comparing ourselves to countries like Germany and France, England and the Netherlands. Ours is a appallingly high rate. Some studies were done in 1981, and this is when the family planning program was a lot, what is called the Title X family planning program was a lot younger than it is now. But they did some statistical studies and showed that by having family planning programs like Planned Parenthood or Title X programs through a health department, they were able to prevent 433,000 abortions in 1 year by having women have access to that. That came out to 1,000 abortions prevented in Montana in that year. And family planning has grown in leaps and bounds in the last 10 or 11 years, so I know that number is a lot higher. Yet, we have the Reagan administration, and was fully supported by the Bush administration, had a regulation called the gag rule, which would affect a program like Planned Parenthood of Missoula, or it potentially could affect our program, meaning that if a woman came into our clinic and was pregnant and wanted to have information about all the pregnancy options, we would not be able to give her all of that information. We wouldn't be able to give her the same information that would be available if she went to a private physician. It's simply creating a two-tiered health system. If you can afford the information, you can go and get it. But if you can't afford the information, you won't be able to get that information. The other area in terms of readily available contraception is the area of research on contraceptives. There have been very little breakthrough in that area. I'm happy to say that there's a new method called the Norplant, which is relatively new, available, which I wouldn't have been able to say a year and a half ago. But the fact of the matter is it's much easier for pharmaceutical companies, and they're much more comfortable inventing and processing things like cold medications. Think about it. If you had a choice between doing cold medication or a birth control method, what would you do? There's a lot of things that benefit looking at the cold medications. For one, cold medications affect a far greater part of the population, so there'd be more chance to use the method. It wouldn't create controversy. I mean, how often have you had a discussion at the table or had a debate about whether or not to use cold medication, and should teenagers be able to use cold medication without the permission of their parents? You probably haven't had that discussion and probably won't. So a lot of pharmaceutical companies are concerned about the controversy, and I know of at least one pharmaceutical company that has gotten out of the area of research of birth control methods because of the concerns of boycotts. Also, there's product liability issues, the long waiting period and research that has to go into FDA approval, and the lack of public funding. And that has been a big issue. One of the things that we're working at a national level is the reauthorization of the Title X Federal Family Planning Program, and that would include some funding for contraceptive research, something that we've had some difficulty getting through in the past. I have on a button just another thing that we can do as part of my recipe to help prevent abortion is I have a button on tonight that says education prevents abortion. And one of the things that we need to work on is the issue of sex education. Sex education at its best in our school systems is often very spotty. It's not done very comprehensively, and we need to keep working on that particular area. The fact of the matter is sex education does not increase sexuality or increase people becoming sexually active. In fact, in many cases, it gives information to teenagers so that they look at all the options and responsibility related to that. One of the things, just to show you an example of sometimes how frustrating it can be, in trying to work in this area is that a couple legislative sessions ago, there was a bill that was sponsored by people that are very strongly against the right of an abortion, and that bill was to prevent high schools from being able to talk about birth control in the classroom. And we called it the Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll Bill. But it basically said that under no circumstances could information about birth control be given. Again, if you're trying to prevent abortion, you need to prevent unwanted pregnancy. Last, and I think probably the most important reason to me that we need to work on this issue is that we need to make the world more friendly to children. We need to work on areas like economic development, child care, WIC and nutrition programs, health care, and programs like the Family Leave Act. Because I think those are the things that are going to help in terms of making the world a place where women are going to say, this is right, this is the right time to have children, and do that area. And one of the things that's so frustrating to me is when the Montana State Legislature is going on, I don't see the people that are so against abortion at these hearings. They're not at the WIC hearings many times. They're not at the health care hearings. I don't see many of our national legislators supporting Family Leave Act that are also anti-choice. So a truly pro-life policy would enable parents to raise their children in a caring environment with physical safety in mind, good education, and health care. Now you'd probably think then the pro-life members of Congress, our national Congress, would vote for legislation that would create that kind of atmosphere, right? If they're pro-life, then they would do that. Well, Catholics for a Free Choice that Vivian already has talked to did a survey, which I'd be happy to share with anyone afterwards, called Actions Speak Louder. And of that survey, what they did was they took all of the senators and all the representatives in the country, and they took their voting records. They took their voting records on Planned Parenthood issues, which are reproductive rights issues and family planning issues. They took their voting records from the Children's Defense Fund, and if any of you are familiar with that, the whole premise behind the Children's Defense Fund is giving that voice to children who can't vote on issues like child care, on issues like health care, quite a few different things related to children. And also the American Public Health Association, which is an organization I'm a member of. And they deal with everything from tobacco issues to family planning issues, a variety of health care issues that affect the public. And what they found was that pro-choice senators, just to give you an example, that voted with Planned Parenthood, meaning that they were pro-choice, their voting records on Children's Defense Fund, children's issues, was 90%. They looked at people that were anti-choice, that voted against Planned Parenthood and against pro-choice issues. Their votes on the Children's Defense Fund were 34%, much lower. And to give you another example, in the House of Representatives, those that voted with Planned Parenthood 98% of the time, voted with the American Public Health Association 84% of the time. Those that only voted with Planned Parenthood 3% of the time were only 35% with the American Public Health Association. So I think it really, as I said, actions speak louder with this, and it gives us a little idea of some of those voting records. Lastly, I want to leave you with 3 bills that are coming up in the national situation that I think it's important for people to pay attention to. One is the Freedom of Choice Act. Lots of people talk about what the Freedom of Choice Act is and is not, but what it is simply is a codification of Roe versus Wade and prohibiting states from restricting abortion, meaning that there would be access to women to safe and legal abortion in all 50 states. Also, there's the reversal of the gag rule, which I talked about earlier, that's going through both of the houses. There's an opportunity for us to change that and make it so that that is not a regulation on the books. And then the third thing is the reauthorization of Title X funding. Again, I think it's really important. I don't think of family planning as a privilege. I really feel like it's a right for everyone in this United States, and everybody should have access to that. So those are the 3 bills, and I'd be happy to entertain questions later about any of them. Thanks.
I'm Willa Craig, and I'm the executive director of Blue Mountain Clinic here in Missoula. We were the first clinic to provide abortion services in Montana, and we are today still the largest provider of abortion services in western Montana. With that said, I'm going to lapse into a little commercial moment here. While we are a large abortion provider, we also have a large internal medicine practice. We are also providers of prenatal care and delivery for women that are choosing to continue their pregnancies. We also have a master's level therapist on staff who can do pre-abortion and pre-adoption counseling and referral, and we work with adoption agencies throughout the state. None of that, however, has the same media grasping potential as it does to be a provider of abortion services and to have 31 people sit down in front of your doors throughout a day. I think, however, that it's just as important to recognize that being pro-choice means also advocating those other services, advocating those other opportunities for women, and we feel very strongly about that. However, the current political environment requires us to speak frequently and loudly on advocating abortion rights for women, and we're going to continue to do that. I'm going to talk a little bit about what abortion practice looks like in the state of Montana and how that might change if Roe were to undergo substantial changes in the near future. How's that? What is that word? Montana is very fortunate compared to its surrounding states. We have a fairly large number of providers throughout the states located in the major urban areas: Billings, Helena, Bozeman, Kalispell, Missoula, Great Falls. When you look at the states that surround Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, South Dakota, and North Dakota, what you see are states in which there may be only one abortion provider, or states in which the abortion providers may be small private practice physicians who really cannot meet the needs of the women in that area. I think that if Roe v. Wade undergoes major changes, or if the practice of providing safe abortions in Montana undergoes changes, there will be a rippling effect that will be felt not only in Montana, but throughout the states that surround us. For years, we have provided, and others have provided, abortion services for women from these states and for women from Canada. Our concerns regarding Roe are generally two-pronged. One is an overall weakening of Roe. The other is losing Roe altogether, obviously. Weakening for us means that this continued erosion of Roe's privacy foundation means that we lose the ability to treat women as individuals and to respond to their unique needs that they may bring to the situation. Roe does provide some privacy opportunities that enter into the medical relationship between a patient and a provider. As these protections are replaced by restraints, we see things like spousal consent requirements, parental consent requirements, sometimes requiring that both parents be notified in the case of a minor seeking an abortion. We see mandatory waiting periods. We see the mandatory reporting of rape or incest incidents in order for low-income women to be eligible for state or federal funds that might provide an abortion for them. These restrictions do nothing to improve the quality of abortion services in this state or any other state. Abortion is already one of the most highly scrutinized outpatient surgical procedures that exist today. Even if Montana were to vote to keep abortion legal, it is likely that they will feel compelled to substantially restrict the practice of abortion in Montana. What that means is any of the aforementioned restrictions are a definite possibility. We may see that the actual timing of abortion is restricted. We currently have access in Montana to abortions to around 18 to 19 weeks from the last menstrual period, which is beneficial particularly for women who may have fetal abnormalities. We may see that restricted to becoming a state in which only very early first trimester procedures are allowed. In the case that we might lose Roe altogether, or that it would become so burdensome that the service ends up not being provided in Montana, there are several alternatives that I see for women. One is that Washington, in its recent initiative, has passed some protection for abortion rights in that state, and women may be able to travel to Washington in order to get abortion procedures, much like we have accepted women from other states for procedures historically.